My name is Heather Alexandra, and today we're going to talk about the best demo ever. Holy crap, this thing is amazing. This is the demo for Nier Automata. I just had to make a video so that we could dissect it because Nier Automata's demo is like this amazing masterclass of intelligent scenario design. Using little more than a handful of enemy types, some really smart camera work, and really well-considered positions for their enemies, the demo manages to create a shocking number of very distinct enemy encounters. The game remixes and rearranges itself constantly, and this allows the challenge to scale much more naturally than most games. It's actually really impressive. Nier Automata shifts and transforms, but it always retains something familiar for the player to latch onto, something to sort of give them the confidence they need to succeed from encounter to encounter. Combat remains fresh even as fights escalate, and the rules of the game world change all around the player. Looking at this, it's very important for us to consider the initial round of encounters that Automata drops the player into. These encounters form the foundation for how the player understands the world, their character, and the general rules of the game. Specifically, the game is teaching the players that there will be two modes of combat. The initial fight stresses melee combat, while the second configuration of enemies teaches the player about ranged projectiles. A third encounter with a larger enemy robot exists to teach dodging as well. By the end of this, players should be familiar with all the primary ways in which enemies are going to attack, and they should have a vague sense, not a perfect sense, but a decent sense on how to avoid them and deal with them. All of that knowledge is then put to the test when you have to fight a sort of pseudo-boss encounter against this giant mechanical buzzsaw arm. These encounters are specifically positioned as a tutorial. They're here to teach us the rules of the game. They're here to teach us what Nier Automata is, and because of that, we're meant to form a lot of assumptions. And the biggest assumption at play here is the camera perspective. For the initial part of the demo, the game maintains sort of the third-person perspective that we've come to expect from most action games. It's the perspective for Devil May Cry and Bayonetta and Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, and we're supposed to assume that this will always be the norm. The initial fight following the introductory boss also stresses the camera as well. After being told how to lock on, you're given the ability to do so and sort of experiment in a small, controlled environment against these little flying enemy types. They kind of look like flying saucers. They generally remain out of reach of melee attacks, so locking on and using your machine guns is key. And the game continues to stress the importance of your machine guns in the following corridor as well. Here, in this area, we're blocked by stationary enemies that are sort of firing their big blobby bullets at us in a straight line. Jumping and dodging doesn't really work here because the corridor is so tight, and so the enemies are positioned here to teach us another lesson. It's meant to teach us that if we fire our machine gun, which we'll probably do to attack them from a distance, we can also destroy their projectiles. Through simple positioning, the game has successfully taught the player how to destroy those weird bubble globs, I don't know what to call them, but now we know how to destroy them safely, and this is crucial for later fights. The following fight after this switches to a flat 2D view. It sort of changes that initial assumption that we had. Dodging doesn't really help here as much because we can't move in the third dimension, so we're forced to attack enemies aggressively and use our machine guns. However, this new perspective opens up a lot of possibilities for our skill set. In this case, intrepid players and players who kind of like to experiment might find out that they can actually fire their gun in any direction. The enemies exist largely in a formation and configuration that means that you can attack them from multiple directions at the same time. You can sort of melee in one direction and fire in another. It's a nice chance to experiment with what the game gives you. At first, the following encounter sort of seems like a repeat of the tutorial fights. It repeats a lot of the same design, but it's mostly here to allow players to perform a more confident and capable version of the combat that they've already experienced. And so all it really does is that it adds more enemies to escalate the challenge. For instance, this half circle of projectile spitting enemies now becomes a full circle. These small changes test the player on what they've learned. It generates a lot of effect for small effort, which is something that I consider elegant design, when you get the most amount of bang for your buck, basically. The challenge is increased, the player gets more confident with their skills, and the game continues to teach players how to use those skills with more and more control. It's really, really nice. The largest change comes slightly later on when the game assumes a top-down perspective. The game really fundamentally changes its form here. While melee attacks are still possible, the view makes them kind of impractical. It's hard to know what you're doing, but it is really easy to situate yourself in between enemies and fire your machine gun. And because of this, the game sort of transforms into a stick shooter, which is really, really cool. When I first played this, it kind of blew my mind. And as if to encourage this, the game places you in various scenarios where your guns are slightly more optimal than your swords. You have a lot of ranged enemies that you should attack. You sort of have a big wave of enemies that you can do like this weird, I'm going to shoot a zombie horde thing. All of these are meant to stress the importance of your machine gun while in this camera view. Remixing initial gameplay scenarios also occurs when the game tosses shielded enemies at you. There's an initial fight where you have one larger robot, and then they repeat it again, but now there's two with shields. It sort of disables and alters the mechanics that were effective before and ensures that the player can't fall back to a single optimal strategy. You have to remix and reshuffle the things that you've learned from previous fights. And through all of this remixing and reshuffling, Automata remains fast-paced and creates a lot of tension in its combat. It also has the added side effect of keeping players surprised and enthralled. This is no more clear than when, in the final boss fight, all of a sudden the game changes into an arcade shooter. It becomes Afterburner or Space Harrier, repurposed for a modern title. The game only has this last for around 10 seconds or so, but this initial phase, this shift in gameplay, adds a lot of energy to the fight that was already really high energy to begin with. These moments, from simple changes to enemy placements or shifts in player perspective, means that Automata gets an extreme amount of use from only a few enemies and core mechanics. A shield here, an additional enemy here, or a tilting of the camera can drastically change how the player behaves. Automata's changes are intelligent and exciting. It makes an incredibly bold impression. I cannot wait to play this game. But most importantly, it does all of this without doing anything too fancy or too difficult.